When it comes to reducing size of your environment, let's say your compute, essentially, I can imagine a lot of businesses out there looking at their, monitoring on their EC2, seeing they're only ever really hitting 20%, or maybe they feel they've got too many instances. What are the main things to watch out for when you do start to reduce your compute size and start to try to save costs from more than a basic level, but more at I'm changing this instance level?
So I think the main thing to bear in mind is again the science, right? You need to be looking at the graphs and the monitoring that you're doing to understand how much you can reduce. When we talk about sort of reducing size, I prefer to think of it as right sizing. It's not sort of you're not necessarily removing resources that were being used. What you're doing is tuning your use of resources to fit the workload that you actually have. And so in some cases that might be reducing the size of instances in your static cluster, but it might also be looking at auto scaling rules and making sure that you understand properly how you can gain more resource at the times when you need it, whether that's in a sort of time envelope or on a kind of metric based auto scaling setup. But the science is important, and the load test that you've built when you're doing this early on will help you figure out what you can reduce, and the metrics that you're monitoring after you make those changes will inform you whether or not you've done a good job. You need to be defining things like your service level objectives around performance and availability, so that you can measure those as you make those changes. And as long as you've got a good understanding of your requirements as far as those performance levels are concerned, service levels are concerned, then you stand a good chance of making the right decisions with the data that you've got. Okay, great. And Rob, anything to add for that?
I think more than anything, it's actually a bit of an anecdote. When I was working with some customers that wanted to cost optimize what they had, they were quite insistent that there was a good usage in there. So we had a look through the CloudWatch logs, which I really encourage you to look at, and had a look at the CPU usage over time. And there was far less usage than expected. They had a pretty large instance size. I don't remember off the top of my head. So they kind of calculated very quickly that actually we could drop from almost one of the larger instances to like the second smallest one, and according to this graph, we're going to be completely fine. And this would save us a significant amount of money almost straight away. And I think it's a better approach to take it as a step down. So instead of scaling down from like a 16x large to a 2x large, just do that step one at a time. Go from a 16 to an 8 to a 4 to a 2. It might seem like you definitely can go to that step. It might seem like an obvious thing to say, but reducing down one step at a time, running it for a period of time, you'll just make sure that there's no adverse effects of your application running at slightly lower CPU or expected like this as well.
So one other thing to worry about when you're making those sorts of changes that comes to mind is if you've bought reserved instance capacity, if your reserved instance spend relates to a specific instance class and size, and if they're not convertible reserved instances, then your making of those changes to instance sizes might have a financial penalty. So you need to bear those in mind, both when you're creating your instance reservations or your savings plans up front, or you might end up basically costing yourself more money whilst you're trying to reduce it, which is obviously not where you want to be. Those sorts of savings plans, reserved instance spends really need to be taken sort of after you've seen a baseline level of operation for a period of time and you're happy that you've done the right sizing that you need to do before you commit to a certain period of spend on those instance types.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think reserved instances are fantastic. They are, if you like, a billing approach to this. So if someone with a non-technical background comes to you and say, how do you reduce costs? It's going to be that approach. For a technical background, there's things that you can do first and apply that afterwards. If you are concerned about that, I definitely reach out to account managers and see what sort of flexibility, if there is any, what other things can be done. And if you are sort of locked in, there's nothing you can do to change, that's where containers can potentially help. If you can Dockerize things and you can make use of the remaining reserved instance capacity that you have inside that contract, then you can, it doesn't have to be that particular, the instance can be used for many different things.